super excited to have you on. It's been a bit of a while to get you on, and I'm super excited to just delve deep into what you do. And this is a topic and a conversation that I'm really looking forward to have a chat to you about because I do have clients that have issues with their cycle. I have followers as well, my audience turn around missing periods, how to do properly a recovery that allows you to gain your period back. And I know you have been helping so many women that you are the best person to speak to about this topic. So I want to have a bit of an understanding first. What is your background? What led you to be where you're at in terms of choosing this path and being the period nutritionist? And how did it all end in here?
Okay, where do I start? So I've been a dietitian, a registered dietitian for over 10 years. I want to say 13, between somewhere between 13 and 15 years. So I just say over 10 years now. And so I started out as basically a regular kind of dietitian where I would put people on diets, weight loss. I really decided on that career path because I was so interested in nutrition for myself. And it was really because I wanted to have the fittest body and I wanted to be healthy, quote unquote, healthy. So that's kind of what got me interested in nutrition. And I loved science. And anyway, so I got married in 20, oh, I can't remember the year, but that's when I decided to come off birth control. And I didn't get a period. So I'm going to try to put this in kind of a nutshell because I could probably talk for an hour about my journey into where I am today. So I went off birth control for about 5 years. I tried to figure out why my period was missing. Went to many doctors. I was either put on the pill, given progesterone, I was told like unless you want to get pregnant, it's not an issue that your period's missing. So for almost 5 years, I tried to figure out what was going on. So finally I got a diagnosis of hypothalamic amenorrhea. And I was like, okay, great. Like after 5 years, I'm like, well, I'm ready to have babies. So before I decided my next step, I was very at odds with my diagnosis. I finally got one that fit, but it didn't really fit because most people know missing periods, also known as hypothalamic amenorrhea, typically are with women that have eating disorders or are athletes or very low body weight. And I fit none of the criteria. I wasn't an athlete, although, side note, I was working out like an athlete, but at the time I didn't think so. And also, because I was a dietitian and I learned this in college that HA is because your HA is related to someone with an eating disorder and so forth. I'm like, nope, this is not me. This is not me. And plus, I'm like, wait a minute. So that means I would have to eat more and rest more? No way. So, anyways, I came to terms with, all right, this is what I have, and I was confident with that. And I decided to pursue fertility treatments because at this time, Astrid, there was nothing out there on HA, like on what you needed to do, how to do it, communities, resources, nothing. So I'm like, well, what if I like gain all this weight and it doesn't work? And so I decided to pursue fertility treatment because I wanted to have a baby like yesterday. It didn't even work on the first or second round because I was still under fueling. I was still probably exercising too much. Then finally, when I came to terms with my own capabilities of what I needed to do to heal myself mentally and physically, that's when I got pregnant. So now today, where I'm at, I have been working with women like myself for the past 5 years, almost 5 years. And I have come to this place in my career because I never want any woman to struggle like I did for as long as I did. So over the years, I've created a period recovery method that touches on nutrition, touches on exercise and mindset so that we can take the guess and the stress out of getting your cycle back and clear up answers that women have been just struggling to get from their doctors for years and years. So, yeah, that's kind of how I came about where I am today. I was able to heal myself naturally with enough food, enough rest. I got pregnant, fertility treatment, first baby, and then second baby was by the oopsie method. And that is, I didn't know it was that easy to get pregnant. What I mean by oopsie, meaning I wanted another baby, but I had no idea like I could easily get pregnant that quickly and soon. So yeah, but that was all because I, started taking care of myself. So I was able to conceive my second naturally.
That's amazing. I really love your story because as a dietitians, we think sometimes we may think that we do everything right for, for ourselves, but sometimes and that we know everything about nutrition, but sometimes we don't really know how to implement things on ourselves, but rather just telling other people what to do. So just being able
Yes.
to understand, like having a point in time where you had to dig deeper as to what was happening with your body, and being able to self-reflect and acknowledge that probably there were few things that were needed fixing and needed reflection and adjustments along the road. It's amazing. So I just have a follow-up question about your story. So what was it in your situation when you got to that diagnosis? What was the thing that was bringing you those answers as to what happened in the lead to being with that diagnosis? So not having periods at all, what led you to that if you weren't fitting in those categories that you were referring?
Yes, that's a great question. And so, what added up for me to, finally come to the realization that I was missing my period due to a condition called hypothalamic amenorrhea, HA, was because I finally was able to take a look at my exercise, and I actually found a form. Or was it a Facebook group? I can't remember, like a long, long time ago. And this is before the book. I'm not sure if you've heard of it before, Astrid. No period, now what? But this was before the book because this book is pretty well known. And this was before any of Dr. Nicola Sykes' work. And I actually met her in a Facebook group. And there was like a group, I don't know, like 15 women. And they're all talking about how they have missing periods and how they, exercise a lot and eat super healthy. And so that kind of made me go, could it really be this? And so, Astrid, I was a super healthy eater. Now, I was a dietitian. Like, I had this image to uphold, right? I couldn't like gain weight. Like, what would people think of me? And then exercise. I mean, everything everywhere tells you that you should exercise every single day in order to be healthy, right? And eat lots of vegetables and watch your carbohydrate intake. So, I was doing all of that. I was following what I learned in school, like, calories in versus calories out, And so I was doing all of these things, which now that I know are completely disordered, but it's so hard because these healthy habits, such as exercising daily and eating super healthy and clean and avoiding certain foods or going to bed super early because you got to wake up to go to the gym in the morning, missing out on social events because you got to go to the gym or whatever. It's very common in our world today and very normalized, right? So it's not like anyone would be like, Cynthia, like, do you have a problem? It's more like, Cynthia, oh my gosh, you're so disciplined. I want to be just like you. So it was these behaviors, and ultimately, Astrid, it was the pursuit to control my body to look a certain way. I wanted a flat stomach. I wanted semi-visible abs. I didn't want a muffin top or whatever you call it now today. That's what they used to call it back in the day, a muffin top. Yeah. So it was all in pursuit to control my body image into what I thought was healthy because that's what was preached to me at school. That's what's preached in society, that in order to be quote unquote healthy, you have to look and appear on the thinner or maybe muscular, fitter side.
How was the transition in your own recovery when you learned that you needed to change things. Start eating a bit more, maybe be more flexible with your nutrition, and start eating things that you consider that is not a not go for me, but it needed to be a new change for you in terms of your choices, your nutrition, eating more fats, eating more calories, eating more carbohydrates, and also reducing the amount of exercise that you thought that was healthy. But now it was time for you to put in place things that you needed to in order to gain your period back.
Yeah, it was really hard for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I I want to say before I answer this question, because I think what you're asking, like, how did that go for me? Right? How did
Mm-hmm.
eating more and resting more go? So it was super challenging for a couple reasons. One, I learned in school that you're like a calculator, right? And what I mean by that is there's equations and so forth that you can calculate how much your body needs for calories. Now, as a barely 5'1" petite woman, I'm like, well, I don't need more than 1,500 calories. My, calculations according to my BMR or RMR or whatever, this is, my maintenance calories or whatever is X, right? And so I'm like, this doesn't make sense because this is everything I learned. And then throw in the part of fitness and being a dietitian, that was my identity. Like I did
Mm-hmm.
not know myself outside of that. My friends were at the gym. Everybody knew Cynthia as the fit, healthy, little dietitian. I was one of the strongest athletes at my CrossFit gym, which I don't even know how because I wasn't even eating enough, but that's another story. Um, so it was really hard. And then throw in yeah, there was some like research on it, but it wasn't like it is today where it's like, okay, there's a book on it. You see other dietitians talking about it. There's, I would say now, concrete science out there. So it was a struggle. It was an internal battle. And then once I was like, I didn't get pregnant on 2 rounds, which I have to say, infertility it was definitely a motivator to be like, I want kids. Like, so if I want kids, like you need to, shut up and do this. But I also wanted to side note, like you guys at that time, that's all I thought was being affected was my fertility, but your heart's at risk. Your bone health is at risk. There's so many other things at risk. Um, so I decided, okay, I'm gonna eat. I'm gonna eat all the food. I'm gonna make sure I'm resting more. I'm gonna eat more carbs, and I gained weight, and that was really hard because I thought, like, what are people gonna think of me, and so forth. And then I just was like, whatever, whatever. I don't care what people think. And then finally, after the second round where it didn't work, because I did eat more, right? And I did rest more. And this is where I see with all my clients, they're like, I'm doing all the things. And it's
Mm-hmm.
because I was comparing myself to where I was, and I was doing more. I was eating more. I was resting more, but it was still not enough for my body. So then finally, near the third round, I'm like, this is it. Like, if it doesn't work this time, I'm pulling out all the stops. I'm getting into yoga. I'm learning meditation. I'm really taking care of my mind. And I think I could potentially have been eating enough, Astrid, but it was the stress factor for me, the constant obsession about my body, about anxiety of like, am I going to have to eat this way forever? Am I going to have to stop exercise like this forever? So I think once I had integrated both the nutrition, the rest, and the mindset,
Mm-hmm.
that's when I was able to conceive. Because side note, if you're like, you know what, I'm not going to change any of this stuff and I'm just going to go right to fertility treatment, it's not foolproof. If your body isn't ready, those fertility meds may not work. So I was grateful to have had that experience because if I didn't lose my period, I didn't struggle with infertility, who knows? To this day, I'd still be living a life that revolved around food and exercise. I just had dinner a little while ago before we hopped on the podcast, and I had shrimp with pasta. And if that was me 10 years ago, Astrid, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'd be sitting this whole time on the podcast, which I wouldn't be talking about this today, but thinking about the pasta I just ate, that was so bad for me. So yeah, it was not an easy journey to say the least.
That's good. Now, I have a couple of follow-up questions about that. The one that kind of strikes my mind right now is how fast do you need to gain weight, or was that an actual important factor? Because obviously you gotta eat more, but how much more do you need to eat, and how fast are you expected to gain the weight in order to be effective for your period recovery?
So this is a question that could go so many different ways. So I'm going to start out with weight gain. So I was never at a super low body weight.
Hmm.
So to me, I shouldn't have had to gain any weight because I was a normal body weight. Now, someone at a lower body weight, so we'll just say a BMI less than 21, 22, chances are they do need to gain weight. You even go lower, BMI 17, 18. Yeah, likely you are going to have to gain weight. But here's the crazy factor too, is that there's women out there that have super low BMIs, have eating disorders, and still don't lose their periods. But I don't want you to the audience thinking here today, like, well, maybe I can get away with this. No, just because you haven't lost your period, if you are at a very low body weight, there's probably other things in your body that are suffering. So I didn't think I had to gain weight, and I did have to gain weight. And you know, with weight gain, I always tell all my clients and my audience, it's the smallest piece of the puzzle. Because you, again, a woman could not have to gain any weight at all and get her period back. There are some women that are at low bodies weight and don't even lose a period. So the weight gain is scary because our whole world really frowns upon it, or says it's one of the worst things in the world you could do is gain weight. So that is playing a part, and we all have histories with our bodies, our upbringing, so forth. So the weight gain, I like to say, again, smallest piece of the puzzle. But here's the thing with a lot of women. Some women will gain weight like in a snap of a finger. Some women gain weight really slowly. There's been other women that don't gain weight at all. But what's happening over time is you put your body in a energy deficit, whether it's yo-yo dieting, like you go up on a diet, you go down, then you weight gain, weight loss, whatever it may be. If you're messing around with your intake, likely your metabolism is eventually going to slow down. And so that's what a lot of women don't know, is if they do eat more and they do gain weight, eventually their metabolism is going to get to a certain place and they're going to start burning their calories or their food they're eating at a normal rate for their body. But because of the years of restriction, that metabolism is slowing down to a very, very slow amount. And on top of that, there's other stress hormones involved. And then your body, when the ones that gain weight the most quickly, chances are their metabolism is just slower than, like, probably as low as it can possibly be, because your body is trying to protect you and conserve energy. And then once you start eating more, your body's like, oh my gosh, well, I better save all this food. There's ample amounts of food right now, so I better store it just in case there's not food around again. And you might think, well, of course there's always going to be food around, but your body literally is like in cave person's time and is like, doesn't know that your pantry or your food or McDonald's is right down the street. Like, it just thinks when you take that food away that there is no food around. So yeah, weight gain is a very tricky thing to discuss because there's so many variables that can affect it, and because everybody is genetically different.
Hmm.
It's it's hard. But what I like to say is, if you are gaining weight and you're eating to get your period back, and you continue to gain weight to get your period back, that is your body trying to take care of you, and that you have to learn to trust it, and that you have to learn that you won't feel the way you're feeling right now with this dreaded weight gain for the rest of your life.
I love that. And my next follow-up question would be then, if weight gain is a small piece within the biggest picture, what is the most important thing in period recovery for you? What would you say is the biggest component that it is like a non-negotiable? It has to be there.
I would have to say I mean, across the board, what I teach my clients, Astrid, is my period recovery method, which is enough food for their body, enough rest for their body, and then working on mindset. And so those three things are a non-negotiable to me, even though I know you
Mm-hmm.
said what one thing.
Yep.
But here's the thing, some women could eat more. I actually had a client recently. She dialed back her intense exercise a little bit, but not to the extent of what she really needed to kind of follow my period recovery framework, which is fine, totally fine. And so she ended up getting her period back and she was still sort of exercising a little bit intensely. And now her second period is nowhere to be found. So, some women are more sensitive to the exercise. Some women are more sensitive to the food. However, though, with every single client and every single woman out there suffering from HA, it's usually an overall energy deficit. So, meaning you're eating not enough, and then you're also moving too much. And so you have this energy that is in a deficit. So almost think of it like you have a bank account, right? And so you're spending each day all this money, but you're saving no money in the bank. Like there's no money. You're just taking from an empty account. So the same thing goes for this energy deficit. So if we start to rest more and we start to eat more, that's going to put money back or energy back into this deficit, because we have to think about we're also spending money or spending energy every day because we have bills to pay. And what I mean by bills is the analogy is like we have to wake up, we have to go to work, we have to go to school. So those are like, we have to breathe. So those are all things that we have to do. So I would say those three things to me are core in women recovering their period, because not only do I want them to focus on the nutrition and on the exercise and the mindset, but I want them to develop a healthier relationship with exercise, with food, and that would require them pushing against their fears of doing less exercise and eating more. And then also simultaneously working on our mindset of like, all right, well, why did we miss our period, or why did we lose our period in the first place? Well, I know you heard my story, right? Everyone's got a story on why they lost their period. They didn't just wake up one day. And so my hope is that you're not getting just a period, you're getting periods every month, or you're conceiving. And then you're also being able to live a life more free of the worry about food and body and exercise.
I love that, because you're encompassing pretty much a food freedom, healthy relationship with food, living a long life, not just about seeing your menstrual cycle, but what it represents as a whole, as you as a woman, in terms of being able to have babies, being able to age healthier, because obviously having that protection from early stages, your bone mineral density is going to be stronger. You're generally going to be at lower risk of other metabolic issues. So it's definitely something that when you understand it from the bigger picture, it makes more sense than just thinking about, oh, what's the point of having periods? I actually am, like, I've heard people saying, I'm actually
Mm.
happy that I don't have my period. Like, that's amazing. So I would love for you to talk to us a little bit more about what are some of these risk factors? Why is it important in the first place to have your period?
Oh, so many reasons, Astrid. So, my biggest concerns are infertility.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be able to, and I don't want to say you're not going to be able to have a baby without a period, because some women will ovulate spontaneously and they can get pregnant. But heart disease. So, there are more and more studies coming out that heart disease is affected by estrogen levels and potentially cortisol levels. So this is really important. Now, the heart disease isn't happening like, you lose your period for a year and then all of a sudden you have a heart attack. That's not what I'm saying. But they're finding later on in life, women are struggling. Like if you were to look at a particular woman, you'd be like, oh my gosh, she's so healthy. She looks so healthy. But she was missing her period for like 20 years and she ends up having, some form of heart disease. And so the heart thing is absolutely huge, and more research is coming out about that. And then, of course, bone health. Estrogen plays a huge role in bone health. And, athletes that, on birth control pills, Astrid, one way of them finding out that they potentially might have a missing period, because you still get a period on birth control, but it's a fake period, is stress fractures. So stress
Mm-hmm.
fractures is another thing that comes along with not enough estrogen, um, feeling cold all the time. So I'm going to go over just the kind of more of the day to day stuff that isn't per se maybe like a major health problem like infertility, heart disease, and bone health, but feeling cold all the time, digestion issues. So many women end up going to a GI specialist first because they're like, oh my gosh, my digestion. They're on the birth control pill because, and then they don't know their period's missing, but it's all related to them being quote unquote super healthy or not eating enough. Tiredness, even though some women don't complain of tiredness, they complain of always like being like amped up and on edge, and that's your stress hormones there kind of keeping you going. And frequent urination is another thing. Brittle hair, skin, nails. This is not really I guess a physical health problem, but thinking about food all the time, um that is a huge indication you're not eating enough. And so those are really the the biggies that I see. And again, if you're on birth control pills, it could be a little bit more difficult to figure out what's going on because it's being masked by synthetic hormones.
We also have the concern that there are things that can sort of mislead or misguide a diagnosis, like having PCOS. So, how do you
Mm,
actually know, is it PCOS? Is it something else? Or is it actually HA?
yes, and that's another great question. So HA is actually a diagnosis of exclusion. Okay, so that means you need to rule out other
Mm-hmm.
conditions that may be interrupting your menstrual cycle. So this means your doctor may need to rule out any other abnormality. And so things that I usually say to women following my pages, like, okay, rule out other things. Okay, we'll get into the PCOS thing. That's almost like a subtopic, but making sure there's no pituitary tumor, because sometimes that could interrupt menstruation, and that's usually a benign tumor in the pituitary area. And other things. I mean, there's other gynecological issues out there that could be. So, getting a workup from your doctor, getting labs ran, getting ultrasounds, all the things so you can rule out to see. Now, in my experience over practicing with women with HA for, closely for the past almost 5 years, many doctors don't know about HA. So a lot of times it's really hard to get that diagnosis. But I like to say, if you can go to the doctor, have them do some tests, you gather your own information, your MRI is clear, then chances are you fit the bills of like, I'm a perfectionist, I'm a super healthy eater, and so forth. You could probably bet it is. But a lot of women will go to the doctors, they'll get this workup. They won't get the HA diagnosis, but they'll get the PCOS diagnosis. And that's a difficult one because for some reason, I don't know, just doctors know, they hear the PCOS, be thrown around a lot, but they really don't know what it is, but they diagnose it all the time. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just a little bit crazy. But your PCOS should not be diagnosed by ultrasound alone. But here's the thing, there's three criteria. It's called Rotterdam criteria. And I don't know if they blanket that across the world, if it's the US, but it's usually two out of the three things. Missing or irregular periods, ultrasound, and high androgens. Here's the thing, all the women with HA have irregular missing periods, and they have typically polycystic, quote unquote, polycystic ovaries. So they're like, I mean, if you think about it, they're not wrong in diagnosing that, because that's what that criteria is. But at the same time, uh, there's never been one woman that was a PCOS person that didn't have high androgen levels. So across the board, any woman that I've ever seen with PCOS, which I usually refer out, has high androgens, and that would be like a testosterone level that's high. So other than that, I I disagree highly with diagnosing PCOS by ultrasound and by missing or irregular periods. So what's happening on the ultrasound is that because you have literally no hormones, because they all are suppressed, they're dormant, they're turned off, however you want to say it, you have these little, they're not really cysts, they're follicles that cannot mature to an appropriate level for you to ovulate. So therefore you see all these tiny little quote unquote cysts that are actually follicles that can't go anywhere or do anything because you have no hormones to get them to the next phase in your menstrual cycle. So as soon as
Mm-hmm.
doctors see that, they're like, oh, PCOS, oh, missing irregular periods, PCOS. So yeah, I would make sure you check your androgen levels. And typically women with PCOS will tend to have like coarse or excessive hair growth, but not all the time. So if you sound like, if you follow my page and you're like, oh my gosh, Cynthia, you sound like you're talking right about me. You're exercising daily, intensely, or long duration with little to no exercise. You're very disciplined, regimented when it comes to eating. You're a perfectionist. You haven't had a period in 3+ months, and this doesn't happen regularly. Chances are it is HA, but again, you have to try to rule that out with a medical professional before. And I don't want to say you have to rule it out with a medical professional before you treat it, but it's definitely suggested.
Sounds amazing. And I think you really point out at something that needs to be better worked with. Like the PCOS is can be very confusing and can misdiagnose HA. Now, I want to get a little bit more in depth with your method because I know that that's something that is pretty much have put together, and you sort of have these four pillars: exercise, mindset, rest, and nutrition. So if you encompass these four pillars, what do you do for each one of those to make these methods that you use with your patients or clients effective?
Of course. So I love that question. So really these particular things that I'm looking at, so we'll kind of pick apart nutrition first is, all right, well, what are you eating? How often are you eating? Are you skipping meals? Are you listening to your hunger? So those are just some of like the, kind of assessment that I go through, that I ask, like, okay, are you eating every few hours? Okay, no, you're not. Okay, well, let's try to start to do that. But it's also going to be super dependent on where they are at with a relationship with food, because they might say like, oh my gosh, that scares me to death to eat every few hours. Like I'm going to stress the heck out. And so we have to find this happy medium of being able to kind of feel a little bit uncomfortable in what we're doing, but not to the point where we're causing more mental stress, because we already have the mental stress of the whole HA, the missing period thing, the not being able to exercise as we usually do, the potential to gain weight. So we already have like a baseline stress. We don't need to like send somebody, going crazy and not being able to sleep. So take a look at the nutrition, kind of do some check boxes, frequently of eating, macronutrient distribution, just to name a few. And then we'll look at exercise. So exercise, how often are you exercising? The frequency, the duration, the intensity, the why behind your exercise. So many women will tell me, well, this is my stress relief. I'm like, I get that, girlfriend, but like right now your body is under stress and this exercise is causing more stress. So we again will find a happy medium of, I still like my clients to do some exercise because it is important to mental health and to get those feel good properties going in the mind, but also it can't be to the point where like, well, I got to go to the CrossFit gym and do a hit training like 3 times a week, still to get my, my feel good feeling. We're going to have to find other ways. And that's where the rest comes in. Maybe we're not like resting per se, but we're resting to the point where we need to find other things that can give us these feel good feelings that exercise does. If we're struggling with that, is, using it for stress relief tactics. And then most of us are like, well, I don't know what to do with myself. Like, I'm not exercising as much. And so that's when we're going to find and not replace, but modify. Like, if we're not going to the gym every hour in the morning anymore, then what are we doing? What are we doing that's going to bring us closer to getting a period? Maybe it's sleeping in. Simple as that, which could be really hard for so many. So maybe it's starting to journal, meditation practice, gentle yoga. So we look at that exercise and that rest component, and then the mindset, which is the biggest one, is what is the why behind the exercise, the nutrition, the body? Why are we fearing food? Why are we fearing carbs? Well, oh my gosh, when I was growing up, I saw my mom, doing the keto diet all the time because she was afraid she was going to get insulin resistance and get diabetes. So it's really debunking all these nutrition misconceptions along the way, and bringing truth to what is real and what is healthy, and really helping a lot of women redefine what is health for them and what do they want it to look like.
What's quick follow-up question? So with exercise, because exercise we can look at, well, when I work with clients, just for like changing physique or like looking over at their overall exercise component or physical activity, we have resistance training, we have cardio, and we also have kind of quote unquote like your NEAT or your daily steps. So if you were to look at those three components of physical activity, what would you say your method would recommend these clients to do in terms of, okay, how much are you allowed to resistance train? And how much is too much of cardio? Or maybe you should scrap all cardio altogether. What about steps? If you're doing 16,000 steps a day, 15,000 steps a day, how much is too much? Can you still do some? Do you suggest doing pretty much very little amount? So what are your happy mediums for or recommendations for each of these categories if you were to look physical activity in these three pillars?
Yes. And that's a really great question because I get the question like, how much is too much all the time? So, first, I want to say it's really individualized. And the cardio, what I will recommend all of my clients to do is to really modify any exercise that is making their heart rate go above 100 beats per minute, which your heart rate could get pretty high pretty quick, especially if you're under fueling already because the heart muscle is on the weaker side. So I do recommend the cardio is paused temporarily and either completely modified in regards to like we're going to replace it with something that's non-movement, or perhaps maybe we put that hour at the gym that you're doing intense cardio for an hour leisurely walk. So I try to again have this happy medium. But in a nutshell, you want to get your period back like ASAP. You cut it, rest, like cut it all out. Do gentle stretching, but that's really it's not realistic for most. In a
Yeah.
perfect world, like if you want your period back ASAP, but also too, I feel personally it's good to keep some in because we can dig into, all right, what is our why do we want to do all this cardio, why do we want to do all this walking, why do we need 16K step count? So it helps us if we keep a little bit of exercise in it. It also helps us examine our relationship with exercise. So resistance training, I would say again, if you're doing resistance training, let's keep that heart rate below 100 beats per minute. And then as far as, did you say it was resistance, cardio, and was it step count?
Yeah. So how many sessions would you recommend for resistance training if you would
So
want them to still engage with that?
so honestly, it really it depends on so many factors. So I really couldn't give a concrete amount, but what I would say is if you're doing 5 days a week, try to cut it down to at least 3 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing 3 days a week right now, try to cut it down to 1 day a week. So it's really taking what you're doing now and trying to cut it in half. And then what I do with my clients is, all right, are we seeing signs and symptoms of your period coming back? Right. And if we're not, then we got to continue to kind of pick at this thing where we're maybe modifying exercise more, or we're increasing our physical activity, or excuse me, or increasing our nutrition. So, and as far as step count goes, this again, individualized. So, for example, say I have a client that's a nurse and she is a floor nurse. She's running around, she's doing alone 15K steps at work. I am not going to be able to get her likely to decrease that step count because she's at work. Right. And that's just what the job requires. But what I will do is say, all right, are you doing an additional 5K steps outside of work? Like, can we, modify that for now? If you're still doing resistance training, where can we kind of, I don't want to say take away because I don't want you guys to feel like you're losing something. This is very temporary, but where can we kind of make up in other areas that aren't necessary, right? Or then there's the woman that works at her desk all day inside and she's like, well, I have to get outside, right? And I'm like, I totally get that. Same. I work inside all day too. So if you're doing 20K steps throughout the day and you're going on 3 1-hour walks, can we modify that a bit and do 1 1-hour walk? In those other 2 hours, can you get more work done? Can you go have coffee with your best friend? Can you hang out with your partner? So it's really, like I said, again, individualized. So I can't say for certain, like only 3 days a week or only this, but what you're doing right now, we want to modify it and do it. And to remember, this is all temporary. That eventually one day, like myself right now, I am exercising all the time again, but it's for the right reasons. And I get a regular, healthy monthly menstrual cycle.
And when you mentioned that you're looking for some signs and symptoms that your period is coming back, what would you say are those? Like if you're kind of in the middle of a treatment, or like you have cut back into cardio and resistance training, you're eating a bit more, you're resting more. How do you know that you're actually closer to getting the period back?
So, one of the main things I look at is cervical mucus, and some
Mm-hmm.
women will call this discharge. So, I like to say if you go from having no cervical mucus to having some, you're moving in the right direction. So, other signs and symptoms could be breast tenderness, could be increased irritability, it could be decreased irritability. So, those are some of the things. And I just want to kind of like side note is you might say, well, I see cervical mucus all the time. My period must be right around the corner. If you're not seeing your period, after starting to see some cervical mucus for a few months, and that's all you see is cervical mucus, no period, then there is still something missing. And that's where, Astrid, I see all of my clients where they're like, I've done the things, like I'm seeing the signs and symptoms, but where is my period? So, the signs and symptoms aren't always telltale. It's just where I see women, I don't want to say fall off, but kind of get discouraged or give up, is that they're seeing these signs and symptoms. They know, oh, okay, my cervical mucus, this, that, but they're still not getting their period. And then they're starting to fear, like, oh my gosh, I've already gained weight. What if I have to gain more? How long am I having to do this? Maybe this is not going to work for me. So all of this mindset stuff comes in. And so that's where I see all my clients where it's like, I've done the things, see the cervical mucus, I'm having the signs and symptoms, but I still don't have a period. So I really go in and bridge that gap and take a look at, their nutrition comprehensively, their movement, their mindset, and then we put a plan in place and in hopes they will get their period back in 8 to 10 weeks and feel confident that they're doing it.
Same for journey for like you mentioned too for exercise. In terms of nutrition, do you take their baseline and do you increase 500 calories? In terms of calories, how much of the surplus do you play with? And do you prioritize any particular macronutrient, let's say carbohydrates over fats, or something that you think needs to be prioritized as well?
Yes, yes, that's a great question. So I steer away from calorie counting. Even though you'll see in the book No Period Now What, 2,500 calories is like minimum. And I like to tell women about that. It's a book. Like we have like there has to be some type of tangibleness. But again, some women might be able to get their periods back with a little bit less. I don't recommend it because guess what? Not only do you not have a period, but your body is suffering in all different other ways that maybe you can't see to the eye. So I would like if I wrote a book, I might have to put a calorie amount just to give some tangibility or some context. But some women might require more. And I know that says that in Dr. Rinaldi's book, like, you might need more than this. And so 2,500 calories is like a scary number. I know it was for me. I was eating 1,500 calories most days, and I'm like, what? 25 for some reason that number is just really scary to so many. So what I do is I really focus on building period recovery plates. And so making sure we're having more carbs and fats than protein. Many of the women out there are highly focused on protein, 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 and lower carb, lower fat. And we kind of want to switch that. Like, yes, protein is important, but if we focus on the carbs and the fats, you are going to get some protein in there. You're not going to be eating pancakes for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You're going to be getting some protein. Even if you're a vegan, you're going to be able to get protein. So that's what I say. Let's prioritize the carbs and the fats over the protein, but we're still going to be getting some protein in our diet. But what I do with my clients is I take to see where they're at with their food and really base it on, okay, are we eating consistently enough? So it's not even overall amounts, because guess what? There could be, Astrid, someone eating X amount of calories that is quote unquote enough for their body, but they're doing it they're fasting, right? They're fasting from 8 p.m. till 12 noon the next day. That fasting could
Mm-hmm.
be the issue, right?
Yep.
So it's important to take a look at all of the things, but I try to get them closest to having each meal with a carb, a fat, and a protein, and with our snacks, which I just want to say, just because it is a snack doesn't mean it has to be small. It can be just as big as a usual lunch or dinner or breakfast. So making sure that those components are there for the snacks as well. So, and in turn, we can't count calories for the rest of our lives. I mean, I guess we can, but that's really going to suck. I don't encourage anyone to do that. It's not really any way to live counting all the time. So that
If
would
they
be
want to, though, if they want to track, would you encourage them to just do that if they want to? Or do you say, hey, I just don't really want you to do
so I kind of assess where they're at mindset
it?
wise. They might say, I can do this, but I have to count. Like there's just no way I have to count. So I would say, you know what? If that's what it takes for you to get a healthy menstrual cycle, let's count. Let's count all day. But eventually, once we get that period or once we become fully nourished, because a mind that is not fully nourished and not getting enough food, the irrational thinking process or thought process is crazy. It's just we have high anxiety when we're not eating enough. So I would say, and I actually recently had a client that said, I kind of feel comfortable tracking it first just to make sure I'm eating enough. I'm like, okay, fair deal. And as long as eventually we'll kind of steer away from that. And they're like, absolutely. So again, finding that happy medium, because guess what? If I said, nope, you want to join my program, you can't count at all. And that may make a woman just lose her shit entirely. So, and that's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to come in and disrupt your life and make things worse than they already are.
One thing that I kind of maybe is a concerning part is if you have a client that has an eating disorder is as a background, and you just tell them not to have any quantifiable numbers, so you just say, I just want to see a plate with carbs, fats, and protein, but their portion size is really small. They have all the
Mm,
components you're asking for, but I don't see that that would put together if you have that 3 days, 3 times a week with some snacks, that you will still get to 2,500 calories at least. So how
mm,
do you trust they're going to get not just the the protein, the carbs, the fats, but also they're going to get
enough of
enough?
it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes. So that's a great question. So first, before clients join my coaching program, I do have a screening process for eating disorders. So if there's ever an event where I feel that's something that's out of my scope virtually,
Yeah.
I will always refer them out. So that's one. And two, if they're able to be managed virtually, I may encourage them to do some private coaching with me first to keep a better eye on that. And that's where I'm just going to keep more of an eye on that person, maybe submitting more food logs and just checking in with them more often, privately, so forth. So that's one thing. But let's just say, okay, they join my program and they still have quite, maybe a eating disorder maybe I didn't completely pick up on our first call. So I do encourage women to submit a usual day of eating to me every couple weeks. And so
Written or
in that,
photos?
um, it depends, whatever they want to do.
Okay.
Sometimes it's photos, sometimes it's written, sometimes it's a combo of. So I might though, if I have an inclination that it's more eating disorder than disordered eating, I might say, let me see some photos. Um, but that will help me because I might say, all right, okay, she's been in the program for like a month now. We're not seeing any changes, and she's saying doing all the things, but like, what's going on here? That's when I might, start to dig a little bit deeper and say, all right, I'm going to need some amounts here just to kind of see what you're doing. And I do give amounts per se, Astrid. So I do have sort of an exchange system within my plate method of saying like, all right, you just don't eat a carb. Like you got to have like X amount of carbs, X amount of protein. And then I show visuals of portion sizes. So there is a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking to, structure than just like, okay, just show up with some carbs and fats and proteins at every meal and snack. But there is a little bit of context of like, okay, well, one carb equals X ounces or something like that. So they have a little bit of context, but I try to give them structure, but keep it very loose because I don't want this to be a forever thing. I want them to be able to eventually move into something that's called intuitive eating,
Mm-hmm.
so that they don't have to revolve around a number, a tracking app, and so forth. Now, if their fitness goals in the future are different, they're marathon training or they're, getting into some, pro weightlifting or, whatever it may be, that may be a different story. But I think it's been pretty successful for all of my clients. And, the eating disorder thing is always something I have to keep on my radar because even if they are fully recovered and they say they are, it's really important to just keep that up. And I'm doing constant check ins with all of my clients, even in the group coaching format.
Cynthia, I appreciate so much your time. I know that you are in a bit of a rush, and I just don't want to keep you for longer. Um, but I do have one more question. If I
Yes,
kind of
please. I have two little boys down the stairs that have not come up and bothered us. We are lucky. We're doing good. So let's
okay, okay.
let's shoot.
So my last question is, how do you ensure that your clients, once they have recovered the period, they don't go back? Because that could
Mm,
happen eventually. With
yes.
obviously, you teach them the basics of understanding and improving the relationship with food and exercise with the body, but there's always a little bit of a risk once they go off their on their own, because when they're
Oh
working with
yeah.
you they have that accountability, they have that guidance, but once they go on their own, how do they don't go back?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I try to do along the way is, yeah, work on that relationship with food, the mindset, kind of digging into the food fears, digging into all the things that kind of led us to the missing period.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because I don't want them just to get a period. I want them to get period month after month after month. And so I try to do my best to do my job. I provide them with all the program materials. I provide them with all the reassurance, all the support. But it's also up to them to play a big role in their health and their
Yeah.
success of getting recurrent periods. So asking more questions, sharing more fears and so forth. So that's really important. And then at the end of our time together, whether it be in private coaching or group coaching, we meet on what's called a next steps call, graduation call, where I again do an assessment like, all right, where are you at? Where do you want to be? And so depending on their, goals, some want to be pregnant, some just want more consistent regular periods. Um, I do offer them a phase two of my group, and some women will take me up on the offer, some women won't. And so what I do in that phase two is really delve into, okay, let's start to really learn and track our cycles so that in the event our cycles start to mess up, we know exactly what to do to get them back on track. And also some women's goals are, okay, I want to get back into intense exercise. I don't want to lose my period again. So we delve into that and make sure that we are still eating enough. We're working on pre and post nutrition. And I would love to do all that in 12 weeks in my first coaching program, but it's just, I mean, it's impossible
Yeah.
because it's important to work that foundation from the ground up, because if I just cover surface level stuff and say eat this, eat that, and then when this happens do this, they're not going to have the tools to continue this themselves. So I found after a good year of doing this, I'm like, these women need more support after getting their periods. So but I hope that if they're not able to, continue on, maybe it'd be for financial purposes, that they are really learning and delving into their relationship with food and body and rest and nutrition so that they can self-assess and know when they're falling off track and how to get back on.
Do you recommend any particular app for tracking the cycles or
I
any
I
works?
No, I don't. Any works, but the thing I just want to say out there, none of these apps know HA. So you get your period back, right? And because Astrid, so many women will work at periods recovery themselves, which is great. Not everyone can, financially afford to work with a coach, and or a dietitian, but I do recommend it if you can financially swing it, because that's going to give you more tools to get that period to come back month after month. I see far too many women, they're like, I got my period back myself, but I can't get period number two and number three, or I can't confirm ovulation and so forth. So if you can get professional help, I totally recommend it. But if you can't, just really delving into healing your relationship with food and body. And I don't know if I think I went off on a side note there, Astrid, of your question, your last question.
Uh, my last question was about the app or
Oh, the app. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
So just being careful. If you get an app, they're not going to know HA. So if you get your period back, we'll just say tomorrow, and your app is going to be like, oh, you're going to ovulate in like 12 days. You might. Chances are you probably won't, because women with HA tend to have longer cycles at first. But just my recommendation is if you do get an app, use it and track your cervical mucus. If you want to learn how to do some basal body temping, to do that. But just to be curious in these early few months, because expect the unexpected when it comes to when you get your period back and kind of regulating. Your period and having it come back month by month.
Do you encourage or discourage any supplements?
I honestly, I don't encourage it and I don't discourage it. I kind of leave that up to my clients. Now, if they tell me they're taking some, like, I don't know, crazy supplement I never heard of, I might say, I don't know anything about that, go on at your own risk. But other supplements, whether it be a vitamin or mineral, like multivitamin, I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? Vitamin D, calcium, and then other things. I've heard of women taking sometimes ashwagandha, um, I can't remember the other one, Vitex, which that's one, if you search on Dr. Rinaldi's website, or Dr. Nicola Sykes, um, Vitex Chaseberry is one that she does not recommend. So she's got a good amount of information on supplements. I usually don't encourage them, I don't discourage them, but if there is one that I know is not appropriate, like Vitex, I might say, no, don't do it.
So once we get our period back, like we have a client, she got her period back. She have been dialed in into all the recommendations and pillars as to rest, less exercise, more calories. When it's time to sort of go back to normal. So remember you mentioned that this is also a temporary approach for
Yes.
getting the period back. Now, when is the right time to exercise more, or getting your heart rate higher than 100 beats per minute, or eating less than 2,500 calories? Do you ever get to diet again and it's totally fine? If you want to modify your body composition or whatever the case would be in terms of like physique.
Yeah, so I recommend nobody does anything differently until 3 recovery periods that are less than 35 days, and that you're at least getting one ovulatory, if not two, if not three ovulatory cycles. So there's some women out there, Esther, that can have periods every single month and not be ovulating. And it's
Mm-hmm.
what my colleague Lindsay and I call it. It's like HA on the spectrum. Like it's not HA per se, but it's a spectrum of it where you can have regular periods but not be ovulating. So that's one thing, really not making those changes, because you have to think about how long your body has been at this place of an energy deficit and been in a low energy availability mode for, could be years, could be over a decade. So giving your body time to heal. And then to answer your question, getting back into intense exercise, I would say don't cut your food intake and go back to intense exercise at the same time, because the body is super sensitive. And then again, if you want, and I don't recommend it, you can start to dip your toes back into stuff sooner than that. And you may find, like, okay, where's my period? It's, above 35 days now. And then that's when you'll start to learn your body more, being like, okay, well, maybe we're not quite there yet. Um, so, and as far as like, changing physique and stuff like that, that is totally dependent on person. I don't recommend ever dieting to change your body. I would recommend changing your nutrition or exercise to get stronger, to improve your physical capabilities, but not to change your body. So, for example, I started running short little 5K races again. And so I picked up my training a little bit because I'm like, I want to see what my body can do. Um, but not,
Intention.
oh,
So it's
yeah,
more like the
not,
intention behind it.
yes, yes, yes. The intention behind it. Not because I want to fit into a two-piece swimsuit and, wear a thong on the beach. So yeah,
I
the
do ask this
intention.
question because I do like in Team Bioline, we tend to work with clients that they are wanting to change their physique or they are actually wanting to compete. And we can't just discourage these clients to not compete because they've got to miss their periods or they will be at risk of this. Or if they already have that issue in the past, well, is the competition really worth it more than your period? But it's kind of like a super delicate balance to and
Yeah.
negotiation with them. So with these clients, how do you work around it? How do you make them okay? You can still go back and just have go to another contest prep and make it another competition, and then you get a comeback. But maybe just changing the approach and how you diet, just give you some more time, be more less aggressive, or like do you make some specific recommendations that allow them to still achieve their physique goals, or do you just completely try to take them out of it?
So I would ask them what's more important to them. Is it their
Yeah.
physique or their health? And then I would lay it down on the line and be like, all right, well, if I respect that, that's what you want. However,
Mm-hmm.
these are the risks. These are the risks involved. Um, I would approach it the same way I would approach an athlete. And that would be, I've had many athletes come to me and be like, well, I'm a runner, or, I'm a college athlete. And I'm like, I'm this and that. You should be treating your missing period like an injury. Heal that injury and then go back to doing whatever you want to do, but making sure you keep your health in the far front, because you know what, at the end of the day, the physique isn't going to take you out of a wheelchair when you have osteoporosis at 60 years old. Or some women, they're under fueling for so many years, they have osteoporosis at 25.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if they know the risks involved, and then you as the practitioner, I mean, you respect that. And also, think about what your values are as a practitioner too.
Yep.
Like for me, for so long, Astrid, like putting people on weight loss diets, and it just never felt like good for me. And I couldn't figure it out till later. But thinking about your own values as a practitioner too, and are those the type of clients that you want to work with, that aren't willing to put their health first, and they're still worried about their physique over their health? Because as we know, what you look like is not, not correlated to your health.
Absolutely. Cynthia, I loved speaking to you. And now I'm going to let you go. It's been an
Thank you,
amazing
Astrid.
conversation. We had so many things that we covered, and I'm super excited to release this episode. I know a lot of women are going to benefit from this conversation, and hopefully this is going to change lives. Where
Yes,
can people find you? Do you have any future upcoming projects in cooking?
absolutely. Yes, yes. So, and I'm so glad you said that, because a big part of what I do, Astrid, I need this awareness needs to get out there. It
Mhm.
needs to get out there. There's so many women being impacted. So where you can find me, I primarily live on Instagram, period dot nutritionist. And I also have a podcast called the Period Recovery Podcast. And right now, starting in January 2024, I am releasing my new group coaching program, the Eat to Regain Your Period group coaching. And that is all new and improved group coaching in regards to updated materials. I've studied hundreds and hundreds of clients in HA, so you're getting more out of doing a coaching program based on real live. I don't want to call them subjects, but real live.
Cases.
Yes, so that in hopes that's going to take a lot of the stress and the guess out. So I'll be enrolling new clients into my group coaching starting in January 2024.
That sounds like an amazing thing that you're going to do, and just changing some lives. So I am let you go, and thank you so much, Cynthia, for everything. And I hope to see you soon. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
do a part two eventually.
Yes, thank you so much, Astrid.